Welcome to this special edition of Poetic Lines. Normally, I interview prominent poets about their new work and creative process. Today, however, award-winning poet and teacher Michael S. Glaser will interview me about my new book, Unsilenced. Michael taught for 50 years at St. Mary's College in Maryland, and he served as Poet Laureate of Maryland from 2005 to 2009. Michael is one of the most compassionate and sensitive writers I know, and I am delighted that he is here today. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to interview you because I think your book is amazing. Poetry is one of the few art forms that enables us to approach extremely difficult and complex human experiences without having to turn to didacticism or preaching. And your poems in the book Unsilenced do this exquisitely as they grapple with the intense emotions of a woman trapped in an abusive relationship. Each poem is a compelling piece of a much larger puzzle, one that explores the effects of toxic masculinity and the debilitating fallacy that a woman can free her abuser from his own darkness. So I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if you would begin with a brief summary of the story in your book, and then perhaps read us a couple of poems to introduce your major themes.
I'd be happy to do that, Michael. Thank you. There are 3 sections in the book. The first deals with the story of my aunt, Elaine, who was shot and killed in 2011 by her husband of 40 plus years. The second section focuses on women I met when I was volunteering at the women's prison here in Massachusetts. Many of them were imprisoned mentally long before they ever ended up in jail. And the third section of the book focuses on the speaker who is grappling with what happened to her aunt and trying to make sense of it, trying to find some way to transform that profound pain and help other women.
Wonderful. So would you start with a couple of poems for us?
Of course. I'm going to start with Auntie. This is a poem that I wrote in response to my aunt's murder and the initial media coverage of what happened. Auntie. When police arrived, she hovered just beneath the ceiling, her oh and no struggling to rise. I don't believe she taunted him, waving an apron as if at a bull. Old man, you can't even shoot straight. 46 years they had teetered at the edge of the precipice. Did silence scream one last time, nagging the spouse neither wanted nor loved? Or did she slump as he wavered, his oh so soft and hideous that only their tabby in the rafters had any chance to survive?
Wow, it's powerful. I love the image of only this cat hiding in the rafters could survive. Read us another one.
Okay. This poem is called The Fittest, and I wrote it to capture some of the vibrancy and compassion and love that so defined my aunt's life. The fittest. Animals respond to a gentle voice, should say as one shook on her lap. Figaro, Daisy, Magic, she coaxed and captured them all. Princess, Blackie, Snowball, saved from the side of the road. One tiger followed her everywhere, a shadow leaving the room. Another hid under the sofa until she was all alone. Love them until they can rule the savannah, always a gentle voice. Elaine, lost queen of the jungle, you should have roared or run.
Lines there, Elaine, lost queen of the jungle, you should have roared or run, are so powerful. Would you talk about that a little bit?
My aunt, as I mentioned, was one of the most loving and compassionate people I have ever known. She had a way of connecting with cats and with people, and she always tried to nurture those around her. But she wasn't able to take care of herself and get herself out of a dangerous situation. That's what the line to me references. She should have roared or run. Her death was such a loss, not only to her family, but to her community.
Like your Aunt Elizabeth, what I know of you is that you also are a nurturer. And you've worked in a woman's prison. And if I'm not mistaken, because you refer to it in your poems, that some of that experience helped you better understand women who are abused and helped you indeed in shaping the poems in this book. Would you speak a little bit about what you learned from working with women who were in prison?
I worked at the women's prison every week for 10 years. And during that time, I got to know many of the women, and I was stunned at how many of them told a very similar story. They'd been abused by husbands or boyfriends, and many of them had also been abused by parents. So they learned a lot of ideas that sort of kept them imprisoned mentally and kept them thinking that they didn't deserve anything better than what they had experienced. Those thoughts are very similar to thoughts that women of any background have when they are in a relationship that involves domestic violence. There is this temptation to think that it is your fault. And just as that imprisoned the women who were at MCI Framingham, it imprisons everyone else.
That the metaphor of being imprisoned by fear is very powerful and very effectively used in your book. Would you read us another poem?
I'd be happy to. This poem opens the collection. It's called Remembering Elaine. One great blue heron punctuates the shore, huddling in first snow. What keeps this steel-eyed juvenile here, weeks after the others have flown? Gray on gray, she stands like a wrought iron question mark. What does she read in the tinfoil sky, its indecipherable script? Does she stand like me, awaiting a sign? Has she hunkered too far down? How do winged creatures lose their lift, their bold exclamation point? One could say the sky turns a deaf ear, that some stories are meant to trail off. She stands ramrod straight like a stubborn suicide or a righteous sacrifice. But I'm not ready to let her go as the season's first storm spits and swirls.
I find the lines, how do winged creatures lose their lift, be so powerful. And am I right in assuming that they are a metaphor for your Aunt Elaine? And if so, would you say a little more about that?
Those lines are a metaphor for my aunt, but they're also a metaphor for any woman who is in an abusive relationship, and even a metaphor for myself at times. Winged creatures lose their lift by losing their belief that they can fly, by losing their belief that they have the right to make choices, that they deserve to be free and to be safe. So just as this heron was unable to do what it needed to do, fly south, any winged creature can lose her lift if she believes the lie that she only deserves a small life. That's not true, but it keeps so many people trapped.
I love the idea of women having wings. That's really beautiful, and such a part of the theme of your book is that women need to remember they have those wings and to be able to use them when they need to. But would you read Interrogation to us?
Yes. So this poem is set at MCI Framingham, the women's prison here in Massachusetts. Interrogation. For 3 weeks in March, a barred owl kept watch from a beech tree inside the barbed wire fence. Who comes for you? It asked every night of the women trapped in their prison blues. The question echoed across the empty yard. Who comes for you, or you, or you? Perhaps the bird divine lonely passings, or knew how lovers, friends, and children rarely visit. Who comes for you, or remembers your name? The owl repeated until every brown leaf, still clinging from last season, shriveled and fell from the tree like an unspoken confession.
There are two aspects of this poem that really grab me. The lines, who comes for you or remembers your name, calls me back to the epigraph that you used to begin your work, the book. It goes, when people don't express themselves, they die one piece at a time. I'd like you to talk about that. And then secondly, the way that the repetition of who comes for you creates the sound of an owl, who comes for you. And I note that owls play a significant role in these poems. So I would like you to talk about that too, if you don't mind. Part about if you don't talk, you forget your name, and the owls reminding us about who comes for you.
So let me start by answering the first question about silence and people losing themselves a piece at a time. That's very true. If you are in a difficult situation, if you're in a painful situation, silence can give you the illusion that you're doing something to calm the situation, to reduce the stress or the drama. But what silence does really is it allows you to avoid the pain. And if you avoid the pain, that can become a habit. The more you avoid, the more you start to lose your confidence, your belief that you can make changes and you can respond in necessary ways. Silence takes away so much of who you are, and it happens so slowly that you don't even realize how much you have lost until you get to a point where you do feel trapped.
How did you learn that, Elizabeth?
I learned that a couple of ways. One way I was by watching so many of the women at MCI Framingham. They told similar stories over and over and over. And those stories included hearing from parents or boyfriends that they weren't deserving of love, they weren't very good, and that they should be grateful for whatever they had. But I also experienced that firsthand when I was in graduate school. My first year, I was engaged to someone who was very charming, very, very charismatic, until I had an engagement ring on my finger. And then suddenly, charismatic became controlling. And within months, I started to feel that I didn't have the right to say what I thought. I didn't have the right to spend time with my friends or my family. And everything had to be approved by my fiance. I'm not trying to disparage anyone, but I realized that I didn't want to put up with something like that. I didn't want to be in that situation for the next 50 years. But in many ways, I had also fallen for the idea that silence would protect me. And that's one of the things that contributed to the pain and the discomfort of the relationship.
Thank you for sharing that.
I have to add that getting out wasn't easy. It took weeks for me to figure out how and when to leave, and I needed the help of close friends, a local pastor, and some of my colleagues. Often when a woman leaves, that's when the situation becomes the most volatile.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it leads me to the second part of my question. How wonderful to have an owl sitting on our shoulder saying, who comes for you? To remind us that we have to come for ourselves. Really, really powerful. Speak a little bit about the owls in your book, would you?
So as I mentioned, the book is broken into 3 sections. And when I was putting the manuscript together, there was something missing. They didn't connect in important ways. And after an owl appeared in the poem about the prison, owls started to pop up in other poems as well. And I realized that they needed to be there because they were the voice of reason. They were the omniscient narrator, in a sense, and they could see things that the humans couldn't or wouldn't. That ability to see the broader picture pulled everything together. But I think it also hints in some ways at the fact that there may be times when we hear a voice, a tiny voice, telling us, urging us to make a different choice or to go a different way. And it takes courage to listen to that voice and then to act on it, especially if you have been silenced for a while.
That's wonderful. I mean, the myth in our culture about owls is that they're wise, but to personify that in your poems with who comes for you, so that wisdom gets turned into a really powerful question. In what I mentioned earlier, in the same way that instead of being didactic or preaching, you're allowing the owl to ask this really essential question: who comes for you? That we all need to ask ourselves, but particularly if you're in an abusive relationship, we have to come for ourselves. That's wonderful and powerful, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your insight, because yes, we do have to come for ourselves, but that can be difficult, especially if the question, who comes for you, who comes for me, echoes over and over.
Yeah.
Many women, from what I have read and from what I've heard from other women, the incredible fear they have that no one will want them, no one will be there to support them, no one sees them or values them. And so if you are suffering under the weight of that question or the belief that you don't deserve anyone to come for you, it can be very hard to comfort yourself, especially if there's active violence.
Thank you. One of the poems that I think works also with this theme, which I'd love to have you read now, if you don't mind, is Secret. Would you read that?
Sure. Secret. I should have told her. I escaped. 2 a.m. He was beating my door. I woke to see two gauzy figures. There was no moon that night. The banging rose. I'll rip you apart. The safety chain, and I groaned. Help me. I cannot breathe. My words tangled like the sheets. I never told her or anyone. One figure stayed at the foot of the bed, the other by my side, my phone in the other room. I should have told her, I escaped. You can too. Don't continue to hide. One specter stood sentry at the door, the other covered my eyes.
The lines, I never told her or anyone, and then don't continue to hide, are important for me as a man because they evoke for me a greater understanding of how men get away with being abusive. But not only are we as men raised in a culture that tells us still that women are the weaker sex and should be subservient to men, and also because men are raised to believe that father knows best, i.e., I as a male know best. And a woman's silence and fear about being abused means that too often the men are never held accountable for their actions. We need owls on our shoulders saying, who are you? what are you doing? Such a powerful poem, and it's important, as this book is important to me, in that I understand better how it is that, and why it is that our culture enables in its own way kind of abusiveness that men too often engage in to women and sometimes even their children. Well, I thank you. I thank you for that. I'm wondering, Elizabeth, what understandings do you hope people will take with them from reading your book?
I'm glad you asked me that, Michael. I hope that women who read this book will understand that they don't have to be silenced or endangered. They deserve to have a wonderful, satisfying life. One of the reasons that I didn't tell many people about my experience with my ex-fiance is that, frankly, I didn't want to be defined as a victim. And I think many women don't want to be defined as victims, so they don't say anything. But it's okay. You deserve a good life. And even if you did make a mistake, even if you chose the wrong person, you're allowed to choose again. And you are allowed to have a fresh start. You don't have to beat yourself up forever because of something that happened in the past. You can be free of that. You can choose again.
It's interesting to me that the whole thing kind of comes full circle to the epigraph of your book. Again, when people don't express themselves, they die one piece at a time. And so in a very powerful way, this is a very life-affirming book and encourages particularly women who are abused to remember that the importance of affirming their own lives and taking responsibility for that by speaking up and speaking out um, is significant. And I thank you, Elizabeth, for this book. It's been really an important book for me to read, and I think an important book for anyone to read to better understand either their own experience or the experience of people that they know. Oh, bless you for that.
Well, bless you for your good questions, Michael, because as we've been talking, I realized that just as silence can chip away at you one piece at a time, rebuilding your life and reclaiming your voice often happens one step at a time. So if someone feels that, oh, I need to make a change, but I'm not strong enough yet to do everything, that's okay. Just take the next step and the next step and the next step. It's the same way with using your voice. Speak out once and then speak out again, and know that you are worthy, you are valuable, and you deserve to have a good life, no matter what anyone has told you or even what you told yourself. You can choose again. You can live again. You can laugh again.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, and the importance of finding our voice and helping others find their voice. I think it's probably what has drawn you, me, and hundreds of others to write poetry, to put down in words those things that are important to us, and to share that in the world, of giving voice to our experiences.
I'm glad you brought up the transformative power of poetry, because when my aunt died, I and many other family members were absolutely devastated, not just by the loss of her life and all of the wonderful qualities that she brought to the family and to the world, but to the way that her story, at least in the media, ended. That seemed to be silencing her again in another way. And so when I was writing the poems and I was trying to make sense of all of this, I also wanted to transform it. I wanted to give her back her voice in some small measure. And it's interesting, the reaction I've heard from women who have read this book is that they are profoundly grateful that I wrote the poems, that I have shared the poems. And many women will tell me that they start to read a few poems and then they put the book away until they can be by themselves, because the poems speak to their own experiences, things that they never wanted to admit, things that have haunted them for many years. And so they need the privacy to be with those feelings as they begin to reclaim their voice.
Yeah, you raise an important component of what we've been talking about here, in that so often we're told, don't be silly, it doesn't matter, he's not that bad, you're overreacting, all those kind of responses to things that are not acceptable, and to have the courage to not accept those voices that are saying it doesn't matter, but to rather accept what's in your heart, saying this matters tremendously, and I'm going to speak out about it. I think we're getting close to running out of time, but I wonder if there's one last poem you might read to close this off for us.
I would love to read the final poem in the book because it gives voice to my aunt.
Great. Let's hear from your aunt.
Her last words. I wasn't afraid as I rose above the room, my house, the tree line. Two pairs of wings soared with me, a slow velvet shimmer. Going, going home, they sang. Wasn't I just there? A field of feathers below bloomed gold, brown, white, to catch me if I faltered. Above a trap door tightly sealed. To enter, you must leave it all. Every sound scattered then, like prey evading a raptor. I heard myself clearly say, time to rise above this life, sever all phantom pain.
That's the heron, isn't it? That you wish to rise above it all. Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a wonderful conversation and reading and book. And I'm richer for it. Bless you. I would like to encourage anybody who's listening to this show to purchase the book. It's called Unsilenced, Poems by Elizabeth Lund. And it's a powerful and important work. And I'm glad it's out in the world. So thank you.
If you're in an abusive relationship, you are not alone. Help is available. There are many great resources online, including the following web pages: the Office on Women's Health, which lists resources in every state, and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which provides links to various agencies and hotlines. If you don't have internet access or you don't want to use your home computer to do research, go to the library at your school or in your community. You can also get information from City Hall or from local houses of worship. Many police departments also offer resources to help keep you and your family safe. You can also speak to your doctor, a trusted teacher or colleague. Remember, it's not your fault and you are not alone. You do deserve to have a happy, healthy life.